Hello, and a very warm welcome to the show. And I'm really excited to be welcoming a guest today. We have Julian Roberts joining us. Julian, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting us on, Victoria. Good to see you today.
Excellent. Well, I was really excited to join you for a LinkedIn Live a couple of months ago. And I was really keen to have you also on my show as well, because your key focus areas around leadership, teams, resilience, I think are really very, very needed and important in the world today. And I know that your book that you wrote and was published a couple of years ago, Weathering the Storm, is a really important book. So, first of all, the title, Weathering the Storm. What kind of storms are going on within teams with the leaders that you're meeting today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always think about, has things changed in the last couple of years? And in essence, they really haven't changed that much. I think what's happened, what I'm seeing now, is the amount of uncertainty in teams, in organisations, in the marketplace is far greater. We had COVID, 6 years ago now, and that was a cause of massive uncertainty. And then we had a Ukraine war. But I think since then, it's just been a catalogue of uncertainties. And I think what people got to realise, we get very focused in an organisation, in a business, about the business aspects, but actually teams are made up of human beings who have a personal life. And so, as much as there's uncertainty within the team, there's actually a lot of uncertainty within their own lives. And I think people are bringing that into that environment as well. So I think that is the biggest aspect. And what comes with that, trying to navigate that, is still that element of change that's constantly there. Sort of organizations. I know my daughter, she works for a big pharmaceutical company, and they're doing what they call harmonization, which feels like a new word for reorganization and cost-cutting exercise. And so there's a huge amount of change, and that causes untold impact on teams. It puts people into a stall position, puts people into a fight or flight position. I think there's lots of specifics within teams going on, but to me, they're still the biggest drivers of what making people feel what's going on. And people are not feeling safe about where they're going sometimes within organizations, within the sort of the environment that they're operating in. And so, yeah, uncertainty and change are the ones that are driving that sort of things to navigate through as teams.
I hear you. And I see this pattern as well, also with some of the leaders, with some of the individuals I support, as well as the teams, that it's not just about whether it's, we call it reorganization or harmonization, as a one wave, but it's almost like wave upon wave, that it's almost, that's the normal part of business, which is that there's constant reorganizations happening. And so, one of the things that I know you talk about in your book is about this idea of toxic resilience, and sort of, I also have heard others talk about it as grit. Could you just talk to me about a little bit about this, because I think there is a kind of a bit of a balance with this topic, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a thing I called out a lot a few years ago, about where you see a lot of people who can sort of push through, and grit and determination, and I think there's some aspects of that are really healthy. It's good to sometimes have a little bit of momentum, have a little bit of get up and go, and a little bit of determination. But if that's your sole way of driving through a difficulty, then you'll very quickly get burnt out and very quickly not get through to you. And it's like going against a brick wall. Because, if I go back to my definition of resilience, resilience to me is about navigating challenges, it's about navigating the uncertainty, the change. And if you, and to navigate those, you have to stand back, you have to, before you get back up, where if you've been knocked down for whatever reason in that context, and you need to relearn and understand the situation, and learn about what next, and to help you navigate that. So if you keep going with grit and determination, it puts a blinker on you of not to learn. It means you just got to keep pushing through and keep pushing through, and it's like going against a brick wall that's very deep, very thick, and you're not going to get through at all. And so for me, resilience would be sort of standing back. What can I learn? This brick wall's heavy, hard, it's too thick for this moment. There's anything I can do, I can sidestep this, I can move differently. That to me is resilience, is navigating it. And what support do I need? What people do I need around me? And so that's how you get around it. And what toxic resilience does is almost glorify those people who work the long hours, who keep pushing through, who keep going through strategies that I will get there in the end, and almost determined. And there's a balance here, there's an element of that, but unfortunately that leads to burnout. Our body can't cope with that, our brains can't cope with that, and the constant failure is quite difficult. And so that's what I call toxic resilience. I think sometimes, I ask people about the word resilience, and it means so many different people. And so when you err on the side of just pushing through and grit, that for me becomes more the uncomfortable side, where you're heading potentially to a burnout. But again, there's an aspect of that can be really healthy. But it's also recognizing that perspective, and often those people who say they're resilient and they can keep pushing through don't recognize that resilience is something you can grow and develop. They see it as a trait, as in you are either resilient or you're not resilient. And yes, you can see some people are more resilient, but perhaps they've just learnt and exercised that muscle. Just like going to a gym, you exercise the muscle, you get stronger. And I think resilience is exactly the same, whether it's a personal resilience or team resilience. You can exercise it, you can build it, you can grow it, you can develop it, and you can make a team and an individual more resilient by doing that as well.
And that's really obviously heartening to hear that it's not a fixed trait. It's not something you're born with, but it's something you can grow. So it leads very naturally to the question of, particularly if listeners are listening to this episode, thinking about actually they are facing some incredibly challenging moments right now, whether personally, professionally, or both. Where to start? Where do you start with resilience? How can you start growing this? Can you just kind of give us a sense of how you suggest people make a start?
Yeah, it's put it in, I suppose, it's trying to do things that will help you, I suppose, change some of your brain chemistry. Because when we get faced with a challenge, we often go into a fight or flight situation. We activate our midbrain, which is our amygdala, and we go into a place where it's very emotional. It's all about survival, and our brain is activated as though something is a saber-toothed tiger. It's a very primitive response. And this can be a really helpful response in the right situation. If you were, I was in Canada recently, I was faced with a bear in front of me, a fight or flight situation. It responds well, could be really helpful because it'll surge adrenaline in me, up my cortisol, and put me into a stress response. It's almost to run away and give me energy. And so that can be healthy. But generally, the things that we're facing and challenges we're facing are not like that really, but our response is the same, unfortunately. And when we're in that position, we can't think very clearly. We know our sense of sort of logic, and we make the wrong decisions, very emotional response, and it's not very helpful for us in that sense. And so to navigate in terms of resilience, going back to that sense of learning, going that sense of stepping back, is putting in, I suppose I talk about practices to help you with that, and I talk about things like gratitude. Gratitude is a wonderful tool. I used to see this years ago as like a woo-woo thing, and I'm a scientist, and I like things that have got evidence base behind them. And so I looked into gratitude and realized there's a lot of science journals about it that recognize and see the impact of this. And they did a study, I can't remember exactly where the study was, and had like a group of people who did gratitude for 30 days journal, where they sort of, were grateful, thankful for various things in life. And that could be, I'm grateful for the sun today, I'm grateful for my breath, or I'm grateful for my roof above my head, whatever it was, small or big, didn't matter. They did a journal for 30 days. And they had another group who didn't do a journal at all. And they then measured they took blood. I don't know if it was daily, but certainly quite often with them. And then the ones who were doing gratitude noticed that the dopamine and serotonin levels were starting to rise. And those chemicals in our body, our natural chemicals, cause us to feel more positive. causes us to see things. And when you feel more positive, this is changing your brain chemistry. So when you start to see things positively, you start to see opportunities. You start to see that problem, that difficulty in front of you. You see the possibilities rather than the impossibilities, because you've got a more of a positive perspective. And so actually gratitude and a practice of gratitude will create that. And I often do this when I have some tough days. I might just go for a walk. Obviously going for a walk is good for in itself as well. And I'll just do I'll do 5-10 minutes of gratitude. And it just shifts me, actually, because I know there's a chemical thing going on in my body, in my brain, and it will shift me. And so that's one practice to do. Things like mindfulness, again, studies have showed this, that what mindfulness does, which is about being present, you can access that through yoga, meditation, breath work, things like that. And what that really does, it grounds you, but also it connects more from your amygdala, which is your fight or flight brain, to your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking logic brain, and it engages that more. And so the more you do more mindfulness to activities, the more you're going to engage your prefrontal cortex, which means you're going to think more clearly, more logically about things, which again helps you into those situations. And so it's those type of things and putting in practices. But I always say, we're not to do life on our own. And I think we always try and think we are more capable than we realize. And I realized this years ago, that thinking I can do loads of things on my own. And we have to do a lot on our own, but actually we need people around us. And I talk about my book about having a community and building that community and being intentional about community, a community of people around you who will laugh with you, cry with you, will go for a drink, have a coffee with you, take you out for lunch, all that, and support you. But also ones who will bring you advice and help you on your journey. Ones who will challenge you, you've invited in, who will challenge some of your thinking, your perspectives, to help you. And I think that's, to me, is really helpful, because life is tough, and sometimes we need some people just to sort of give us a metaphorical slap on the face, saying it's okay, this is what you can do about this, and help you navigate stuff. Or we thought about this, or I'm not so sure about that going down that path, or whatever. So we need that, or just to be there and to listen to you and support you and hear you and encourage you and sort of cheer you on as well. So that, to me, is how you help build that personal resilience in your life.
I love those examples. And I really appreciate as well you sort of talking about the evidence for it, because I'm sure some people have heard of these ideas, being grateful, really being very specific with gratitude, mindfulness. But actually, saying that there is evidence for this, saying that there is support for it from a scientific point of view is really powerful. And the last one, community. For sure. I mean, this is very aligned with the work that I do. I'm a great believer in the power of connection, to be able to kind of really create more in the world. And I like the way that you also brought that lens of it's not just about positive connection, but also sometimes being challenged, having people kind of look at your ideas, think with you. So thank you for sharing those really great ideas. And I'm really curious, obviously that's very much on the individual level, but there will be people listening to this who are leaders, who are feeling challenged for themselves, for the organization, but also challenged because their team perhaps are in a tricky space, that their team are not in a place where they're empowered. Perhaps they are feeling low in morale. So if it's that sort of dynamic, again, I'm really curious what resilience looks like from that lens.
Well, there's a number of things that I talk about in terms of building that sort of team resilience. So from a motivational point of view, in that sense of people feeling a bit, perhaps a little bit, I don't know, fed up from the world, what's going on and things like that, and how do you inspire people? How do you get people stirred and everything else? I talk about having a real sense of real clear purpose for that team. Obviously you start with the organizational purpose, and I'm not talking just a purpose statement. I'm talking a purpose that is runs through the culture, that runs through everything within that team, and something that will inspire people, something that will make them believe that this is something to be part of, rather than just I turn up and I do this. Actually, I'm actually contributing to a bigger picture. The classic one is get a man on the moon, or you think of the Artemis recent adventure, that they didn't just sit there in the sort of capsule thinking, oh, we're just going to fly around the moon. There was a sense of purpose behind all that, and it wasn't just those five or six astronauts? I can't remember, maybe five astronauts that are in there. It was the whole of NASA. Everybody knew what the purpose was, to get out into space, to go around the dark side of the moon, come all the way back round, 5-day trip, whatever it was. And everybody was clear about that purpose. Whether you were, a cleaner, whether you were on the control desk, whether you were a supplier to NASA, you knew what the purpose was, and there's real clarity of that. And that gave you a sense of meaning that you were part of that. So everybody at NASA, I don't know how many thousands would have been there, all had a part to play in whether you were the one who drove the shuttle thing to get the rockets to get to the launch pad, or you the one who put the fuel in, whatever it was, you had a purpose to a bigger purpose. And I think that's what inspires people. But what it also does, when things are tough and difficult, it really helps inspire you. And I had a conversation back in COVID time. I had a team where I obviously we all lost sense of what was going on in the world, and how do we sort of align people, how do we get people inspired. And I had a team that I was working with, a CEO, and he was a purposeful driven sort of team leader, but also organization. And I said to him, get back to what your purpose is, talk about your purpose, share your purpose. He went off, did obviously a Zoom call and did that. And he found that the team just got inspired. It made them think, because what a purpose is, it's something very far and beyond where you are now. And it's something like a bit of a North Star. If you walk along at night and you see the North Star, wherever you walk, you can still see the North Star. It still helps you navigate things through. And like a ship, the North Star would be used at whatever point you are. You can always see the North Star. And that's what a purpose does. It helps you navigate those different things, helps you stand back, helps you see the horizon, helps you see where I'm going, keeps you on track, and making sure you're doing things that are in line with where you want to get to, which is through your North Star or through your purpose. And so it becomes quite motivational. And so having that, when the chips are down, get back to your purpose. What is my purpose as a team? How do we get back to that? What do we need to do? Ways of working and things like that. And so that's, for me, is the inspirational piece within the context of building resilience and purpose within teams.
And I like that sort of balance as well, because what you've talked about is from the individual level being very much about the practices, the habits that will keep you resilient. But actually what you've just described there from a purpose point of view is about the longer term picture, about the drive, the motivation. Like, why get up out of bed each day to do this work? Why does it matter? Why does it have the sense of direction? And I think that's very, very important at that upper level, but also at that sort of longer term view as well. And so that makes a lot of sense. And does that work also in context? You talked about right at the beginning, this sense of there's a lot going on with reorganizations and restructures right now. Does that still really help in that kind of context? Because obviously there are people who may not be part of that organization going forward. What have you found in your work in this specific situation?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, if you've got an organization that's got a real clear purpose or clear vision, anything you do within that organization to change, whether it's a reorganization, whether it's a new sort of direction or a new strategy or whatever it may be that will cause change in some capacity, if you lead with that, and then as in always, there's always going to be some sense of, you might have to lose people, that's how as organization is. It may be due to cost, but if it's led on a sense of purpose, then people see a sense of meaning, a sense of understanding of what is going on, why it's happening. I don't think a lot of organizations do that very well. They just get into the tactical aspect of, we need to reduce by £1 million worth of headcount or whatever it is, rather than going to get to where we want to get to. This is what we need to do. So it's thinking, why are you doing that? And it's putting the why behind it. And when people understand the why, and I think this is where my daughter is probably finding it difficult, because the use of the word harmonisation is just an absolute, personally, a joke, really. It doesn't make sense. But there's no sense of, I don't believe she's got a sense of clarity to the why behind it and the bigger picture. Now, I know you can't always know the bigger picture in fullness, but the more you reveal that to your organisation, the better people will take it. There's still people who might have to go, and still people will struggle with it. That's life. But if you can get the why out there, it can really help people and help people navigate that difficulty. And I think this is interesting. I always find it interesting with when I work with leadership teams, and they come back to, we shared this strategy we were going to do, and we did all this, and we did it all as you said, and they just didn't respond very well. They took ages to get to know it. And I go, well, how long have you been aware of this strategy you were going to do? Oh, we've been working on it the last 12 months. So you then reveal it, and you expect them to all switch in about a few weeks. And you've had 12 months to get used to know this, and you've gone through the change curve and grappled with it. And also you've been part of changing that and contributing. They haven't. And they go, oh yeah, didn't realise that actually. So that's how humans work. So again, using the change curve is a very good way of navigating the change as well, and navigating how you mitigate it and how you work that through with people. But giving people the why is so valuable in times of change.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the change curve there. I mean, I'm aware of it, but perhaps you could just briefly walk us through it, just to help people also understand, where people might be at on a change. Because I think that's a great example.
I will try and remember and recall it. I use a graph and I go through it and I'm trying to picture it in my head. So it came from probably in the 1960s, I think. And it came out of a grief, how people respond to grief. And then they realised actually that's the same thing in any change, and that can be a small change or a big change. And it's in essence, it's. I mean, I've got a graph here, but it's. I think the vertical axis is your energy, and your horizontal is over time, and it sort of goes up and down. And so the first stage is the shock, where suddenly people, get told, we've got harmonisation. There's a bit of a shock. And that in that mode, people are like, it's the first time they've heard it. They go into a little bit of fight or flight, and they don't know what to do. They almost stand still, type of thing, almost that freeze and everything else. And then what happens is the energy sort of drops, but people get into this what we call sort of frustration stage, angry stage. It's a very verbal, vocal, emotional stage where people start complaining, getting cross and angry, and why is this happening? That sort of phase, and then that drops, and their energy drops. Then again, as time goes by, to a phase what you called like depression, not clinical depression, just a sense of flatness, lack of motivation. They start to, I'm not bothered doing any work around here because harmonisation's going on, and it comes a little bit sort of flattened, and then to get people out of that, then you obviously that inspirational. That's the why bit comes in. And then people sort of start to have a go at perhaps incorporating this new way of thinking, or this new sort of ways of working type of thing. And then they integrate, and then they start to then become part of, and they go through the light, off they go again. And you can go backwards on this change curve. It's not just a one way. Some people go through certain stages quicker than others. And I always say to organizations, when you're doing perhaps a big transformation, and even an harmonizer, whatever you want to call it, show people the change curve, and show people the emotions that will happen at these points. And it's not patronizing. It's also, this is what will happen. And actually to recognize that and to know that, and people have that sort of language, then it's easy for the managers then to help navigate and then give strategies at each point. What does each of those areas need to help them people move forward? And just recognize that that's how humans work. That's fine. It's okay. And it's not people in boxes. It's just trying a helpful thing. And I've done that with teams. I did it with a team of, it was a charity, and they were going through a huge amount of change. New CEO going to come in, new premises, new people coming in, a whole load of stuff going on. And so we did a whole workshop on the change curve and change, and they found it really helpful to have that as they go through, and it became a language as they move forward on it as well. So that's it in essence. Without a graph, it's harder to explain, but
Well, you did a
People look it
great
up.
job. Yes. Well,
It's called the Kubler-Ross change curve. That's what it's called.
brilliant. Well, thank you so much for walking us through that. I know that we're sort of on video. We do create a video version of this podcast, but I think it's just really helpful to recognize those stages. And likewise, I see in my work with leaders and teams, it's not always a sort of linear thing that people go through it step by step. I think there's a lot of what I call spaghetti curve going on, where it's just going backwards and forwards and in and out. And it applies, whatever the change is. I sometimes see it with leaders who are changing context culturally or moving location. But that was a really great explanation. So thank you, Julian. Really appreciate that. And the sort of one other topic that I also wanted to touch on, which I saw you talking about in your book, which I found very interesting, was because it is also part of the work that I'm interested in, but this idea of how resilience connects to diversity and to belonging. So I'm just really curious about that. Could you just talk us through, because I hadn't seen that connection made before between those two ideas?
Yes, and I hadn't until I'd spoken to somebody a few years ago. And it's one of those things, because I was a little bit on the sort of diversity aspects. I think I got a bit frustrated because I think a lot of organisations were ticking boxes, and I did my psychology masters. I did a study, one little study on this about sort of tokenism and the whole sort of female leaders and how we need to have more female leaders. Therefore, we'll get more female leaders to do the quota, and we have targets, and I know sometimes the targets can be helpful because it pushes organisations to do that. But I felt sometimes the diversity thing was was a tick box, and I then spoke to a number of experts who were in that world, and that really helped me. And so I tackled it and realised that diversity is really essential in the context of building a resilient team or a resilient organisation. And the perspective I come from is that if you've got a diverse team, and whether that's and diversity, for my definition, was broad in everything, from color, ethnic minority to sort of lifestyle, experience, age, generational. If you've got a variety of that, then what you have is you got different lenses and you've got different perspectives. And when you're trying to solve a problem, when you're trying to navigate some uncertainty, when you're trying to navigate some difficulty that's happened within your team, the more different perspectives you have, the better you will navigate that. And we know there's more studies done that if you have in higher diversity, that you have greater performance as a team. Again, there's a massive link to that. I think more a real correlation to that. So that's why I included it in using diversity for that. And it's things that I do stuff with charities, and I talk about, there's a lot of trustees within charities. I mean, average age of a trustee is about 61 years old. Down to the time and energy and capacity they have, that's why it tends to be like that. But when you have a trustee board that's got some in the 30s who are still working, I'm a trustee, and I'm sort of working and stuff, and then some people who are retired, again, that gives you, and some generational differences, again, that gives you good perspective. But also a lot of charities are now trying to get what you call lived experience trustees, so people who have actually gone through the services of that charity. And I worked with a charity recently where they had 2 trustees who had been part of their homeless charity many years ago, and so they'd gone through it. And again, you got that different perspectives, and to me, that's diversity, and that's gives you it. If you have all people all think the same perspective, how are you going to navigate stuff? You're going to have the same sort of solutions in essence. And so that's my spin on it. And it's not about a tick box. It's about the more diverse you have, the more ideas and solutions you're going to get for some of the problems you're going to face, because you are going to face problems. That's a reality. That's how I play it out.
Fantastic. And I love that connection. You make it to then making teams, whether it's a trustee group or a board or a team, more resilient. And I really kind of, for me, that was a really, really interesting connection. Julian, as we're coming towards the end of this podcast episode, I'm really interested in, we're in a moment in time. We're recording this in sort of spring 2026. There is a lot of change happening in the world, and things have moved on probably since you wrote the book. What are you sort of changing your mind on to do with resilience, or what have you seen is come up new for you? Or do you think it's about actually the same principles apply? It's just that the conditions and the storm is changing.
I think, that's why I talk about principles, and I think principles have a bit more longevity to it, and that I think the principles probably still apply. I'm probably emphasising far more now the whole psychological safety within the context of teams, perhaps more than I did. I included in my book, but it was, I think now I would say that would be an absolute core sort of principle to have. If you have psychological safety, and that's an environment where people feel safe to admit a mistake, safe to try something new, safe to challenge each other, challenge the seniors, all done in a kind of respectful way, and an environment where they can do that and not feel they're going to get sacked or shamed or whatever it is that sort of way it sort of represents in that sense. To me, that's where you get, and then again, there's massive amount of data that you get high performing teams in terms of psychological safety. And just to give you an example of that, if you go back to NASA again, I'm not obsessed by NASA, but there's some great examples where the Challenger shuttle mission 9, whatever it was, the 86 or something like that anyway, that blew up after launch, unfortunately, and killed 7 astronauts. That could have been avoided. And the reason it could have been avoided is that an engineer, I think a few days before launch, had pointed out that the O-rings were leaking and said, we need to fix it. But his senior said, no, we need to get on with launch. We've got to launch. And so he didn't feel he could push it any harder to actually challenge it. And so they went ahead and obviously see what's happened. And so NASA realized that they had an issue with psychological safety. They didn't have it, basically. And so they had a team of psychologists come in, and over a number of years have then created this environment where people can challenge and people can push back in sense of that. And they've created an environment where it is incredibly psychologically safe. But also what happens with that environment is where people try new things. So you get lots of innovation, because it doesn't matter if you fail, because what do we learn from it? That's how we think. It's not a failure, it's feedback, it's learning. So you innovate better and quicker. You encourage to do that. And so to me, I think psychological safety is probably a real plank of cornice of building a resilient teams. And I focus a lot on that. And I focus a lot on, I probably become a little bit of a broken record sometimes with teams about this challenge side of things, because I don't think teams challenge each other enough. Mm-hmm. And when I talk about challenge, it's trying to create this critical thinking, because I think there's a lot of groupthink, nodding along, but actually challenge and done in the right way can create critical thinking, which means you get better results, better ideas, better ways of working going forward. And my favourite question always to every team is, why is this a bad idea? Rather than just going, oh, that's a great idea. Why is it a bad idea? What are the pitfalls for this idea? How can we make it better? Or actually, it actually is a bad idea. Let's not do it. That type of thing. So that would be more my emphasis now.
Love it. And I love the way that's a great end to this episode. Why is that a bad idea? I think that's a really good challenge for people to take away, to try out in their next team meetings, and really see what comes out of that conversation. Julian, thank you so much for joining me here today. I've really enjoyed this conversation, all the different angles on resilience, thinking about it through very different lenses. And we're certainly going to put all your links in the show notes for people to find you, to connect with you, to find out more about your work. But is there any sort of final words that you'd love to share, or anything that you really want to has stood out for you from this episode that you'd love to just kind of reiterate back as we close up?
Yeah, well, just to say, I think people get confused sometimes, where they think if you're building a resilient team, I just get 10 resilient people and we'll have a resilient team. And it doesn't work that way. It's different dynamics, and team dynamics need to play in that. So having resilient people is obviously great in the sense of personally, but just bringing them together doesn't make a resilient team. So again, just to think about how that works, and just to think, if you link team resilience to high performance, overcoming, delivering great stuff, that's what it's all about. I think it becomes a little bit, I think we're all resilient, but actually, if you link it to high performance, if you link it to, overcoming challenges and navigating some difficulties, that's what it's about.
Fantastic. Well, Julian, thank you so much for joining us here today. Julian Roberts, really great to have you on the show, and very much look forward to sharing this episode and seeing people next time on the show. Thank you, Julian.
Thanks for having me on. Brilliant. Thank you.
Bye for now.